Good afternoon and good morning. I'm Khanit Phatong. I'm from Electronic Transactions Development Agency, or ETDA, from Thailand. Today, I would like to give you a brief information about the status of digital ID in Thailand, as well as the current project about digital ID and authentication in my country. This is the timeline of our journey. The journey to build a trust and secure service ecosystem in digital ID in Thailand. We can say that the digital ID initiative has been started in 4 or 5 years back. In 2018, ETDA has launched a recommendations for digital ID, which is the main guideline for personal digital ID, digital proving, and authentication standard in Thailand. And in the same year, in 2018, we have the first national digital ID project in Thailand, or we call it National Digital ID Project, or NDID in short. This is the very first project to generate a digital ID for the Thai citizen. The first pilot use case that we introduced in 2018 is about the use case in opening the bank account. So with the digital ID, meaning that the people who want to get the new bank account, they do not need to go to the branch and go to the clerk to fill in the paper forms, but they can use the digital ID and then they can apply for the new account through their mobile phone. And in 2019, because we consider that digital ID is very important and will get a very big impact to the society. So ETDA, we propose to amend the law. So in 2019, we proposed to amend the Electronic Transaction Act to include the digital identification section. So by changing the law, it means that the person or the business who run the business about the identity proving or identity authentication, they need to be regulated by the authority. And in the same year, ETDA has been appointed as the regulator on this area. So the main regulator about the digital ID in Thailand is ETDA. And in the years later, in 2020, we also know that we have the big impact from the COVID-19. Therefore, the government tried to find a way and try to introduce the subsidy program. In this year, the Thai government under the Ministry of Finance introduced the application called Phatong. This is a Thai word. It means the money wallet in English. From this mobile application, the people who want to get the subsidy money, they need to apply for the account on Phatong application. By doing so, it means that the government can enroll the people. They will get the digital ID from the Phatong application. From this program, we can say that it is the very first program that the government can generate a digital ID. The very massive number of the digital ID in Thailand. We have roughly 30 million accounts for Phatong user account in just only a few weeks. And in the same year, in 2020, ETDA considered that because of the new landscape that we get impact from the COVID-19 and also the digital disruption, there are many digital services already introduced in the market. So in order to get the idea and how to regulate the service, we introduced Digital Service Sandbox. For this sandbox, it will help regulators understand and get to know about the business model and also the new technology, because we realize that as the regulator, we have the cumbersome process about the government process. So we cannot go in the fast pace uh, along with the new technology. So we try to set up the sandbox and let the business person, the new technology, and the fintech try to offer the new service in this sandbox. For the current digital service sandbox, it allows three areas of the digital service in this system. Those three services are digital ID, e-document service, including the digital signature service, and the last one is about the e-meeting and e-vote service. And in 2021, which is this year, um, we at ETDA already consider that there are lots of providers that try to use the biometric technology in identity proving service. So in order to get the same standard of the service, we set up the technical working group in Thailand, try to define the standard about the biometric technology in identity proving. And we are also working with the Ministry of Interior, which is the main authority who is responsible for the identity of the Thai citizen, to introduce the official face verification service, or FVS. By having this service, meaning that the identity service provider can use this official service to verify the face of the Thai people when they do identity proving. And for the last piece for this year, we introduced the draft of the Thailand Digital ID Framework. Even though we have lots of activity about the digital ID, but there's still some ambiguous and some confusion about how to use digital ID. So we think that we need to have the framework and let the people in the landscape and in the ecosystem knows how to use the digital ID, how to define the category of digital ID, and how to make them the digital ID system work together. And for next year, uh, because we already introduced the guideline in 2018 about the personal digital identity, there are several questions and requests from the business about how to define the digital ID for the corporate, as well as the digital ID for foreigner. So for 2022, we will try to focus more about the standard for the corporate digital ID and the foreigner digital ID. And because we already have the standard, which is already 5 years old since 2018. So we plan to review and revise the standard of the individual digital ID and identity proving standard, especially for the section about the identity assurance level, or the IAL. And in next year, we plan to set up the biometric testing lab, since we already have the standard in 2021. So we try to bring that standard and make it happen to be the qualified testing lab in Thailand. So with the testing lab in Thailand, it will help to increase the standard of the biometric service in Thailand, because right now we have to mainly rely on the foreign service. And this is the example about the Phatong application that I already mentioned. The way that people enroll for the account, they need to have the mobile app and they need to have the Thai citizen card. By doing so, to enroll to the digital ID Phatong, the people need to take a picture of the citizen ID card and then they need to do the selfie. When they have the two pictures from the card and the selfie one, the algorithm of the Baotang application will compare the face from the selfie to the face on the card. If they are matched, so the system will generate the ID and the account to the user. This is a very easy one because the user do not need to go to any outlet or any kiosk. They can apply this at home. But there's still some drawback about this because we use only the card and the selfie. So the level of the assurance of this identity is not that high. So we consider that this is an IAL level 1 because according to the standard of ETDA, if you want to get the higher level, IAL level 2 or IAL level 3, meaning that you need to verify the card against the system of the authority. But in this case, it is an offline comparison. So we consider this is a IAL level 1. But that's sufficient for the service for this case because for this subsidy program, the government want to give away the money to the people. So they do not consider this as a high risk activity. But in the future, if we want to upgrade the service for the higher risk level, perhaps we need to re-enroll for the ID on Baotang. And as I mentioned that, we already have the sandbox for the digital ID. These are the three key players who are already testing in ETDA sandbox for digital ID case. The first one is DOPA. DOPA is the Department of Provincial Administration. This is the agency under Ministry of Interior. They introduced the digital identity version to the citizen through the mobile application called D.DOPA. And the second one is the NDID. I already mentioned in the previous section that we already have the first system for the National Digital ID in 2018. Firstly, they has been established from the group of private sector and the public sector. And then after that, once the system is settled, they turn the service to the private company called NDID. So once they turn to be the private company, they need to request for the license for the authority. That's why for this case, they need to join the ETDA sandbox. In the ETDA sandbox, NDID try to expand the service from opening bank account to other industry. For example, in the security industry and insurance industry, as well as they try to offer the service to government e-service as well. And the last one, it calls Tanbat. Tanbat is also the Thai word. It means card replacement, meaning that the user do not need to carry the card, but they can use this digital ID on their mobile phone in order to do the digital transaction. This digital ID, Tanbat, has been led by ABTC, or National Broadcasting Telecommunication Commission. This digital ID is the ID which is promoted from telco uh, ecosystem. But for the NDID, this is from the financial sector. So I think they try to spread about the market area. And for the DOPA, is for the government service. For the next one is about the government digital ID initiative. I already mentioned that DOPA, Department of Provincial Administration, is the main person who issued the ID for Thai citizen. For the current status of Thai citizen, every Thai citizen who is over 15 um, years old, they will get the Thai citizen smart card. In the card, there will be the smart chip, the microchip that will contain your information like a name, the address, and also the blood type, and also some other biometric information like face and fingerprint template. This information will contain in this small chip card. But because of the new technology, they try to introduce another alternative one, the digital ID on smartphone. For this digital ID version, the person can carry the digital ID on their smartphone by having the application called D.Dopa, which is already prepared in the iOS and for the Android OS. Once they need to enroll for the D.Dopa ID, they still need to go to the DOPA branch or kiosk or DOPA representative office. What they need to do is they need to use the smart card and then insert to the card reader. By doing this, the card will be verified to the DOPA server. And the user, they also need to verify the fingerprint by putting their index finger on the reader. The equipment will try to verify the fingerprint of the user against the template which is already stored in the card. Once everything is okay, meaning that the card is still valid and the fingerprint is matched, the system will generate the digital ID and the user can obtain the digital ID by scanning at the QR code. Once they scan the QR code, the ID will appear on the mobile app. This process, we can consider that it is much more secure than the Phatong one, which is the IAL level 1. But for this process, we consider it's IAL level 2 because at this point, the person will use the card to insert to the card reader and it will be verified against the authority. This is the main difference between Phatong and D.Dopa. And this is some information about the D.Dopa and how to use the D.Dopa as the authenticator. D.Dopa has been designed based on NIST standard at the IAL level 2 and also the AAL level 2. And the whole system of the D.Dopa, it will work based on the Federation authentication model. In this case, they use OpenID Connect protocol. So by using the OpenID Connect protocol, it can work with many legacy of the government service, which is the browser application. So when the user want to access to the government service website, instead of using the username and password, they can use the smartphone as the authenticator and scan a QR code. Then the system will verify the user. If everything is okay, so the system will let the user to access to the government application. And what is the next move? We already have the DDoS as an authenticator and work in the OpenID Connect protocol. But ETDA already consider about the next improvement. As we already know that for the current cyber economy and the digital ecosystem, the cyber attack is very the crucial matter. So we try to find a way how to make and introduce for the strong authentication mechanism. So in this case, we try to combine the existing strong authentication protocol in the market, which is FIDO, and we try to match this with the authentication of the existing system, which is OpenID Connect. So with the both of the FIDO and OpenID Connect, we get the prototype one that will introduce about the strong authenticator. We have the mobile that can work in the FIDO way, and we have the server for the IDP server that can handle both the FIDO and the OpenID Connect. With this design, the relying party or the legacy system of the e-government service, they do not need to change because they already support for the OpenID Connect. But we can improve the security of the authenticator by using the much more standard protocol. So that has explored, and we have the prototype for the FIDO UAF 1.1 or the Universal Authenticator Framework. Somebody might ask why we consider to use the UAF 1.1, not the FIDO 2, which is the newer protocol. UAF 1.1 is introduced perhaps 3 or 4 years back, but we consider that UAF 1.1 is still the active protocol. And for this current ecosystem of the Thai authentication ecosystem, we consider that UAF 1.1 is more proper at this stage. But in the future, we also try to study about the FIDO 2, and we try to study, and we will introduce another prototype for FIDO 2 in the coming years. Once we know well and we have enough information about the FIDO 2, we perhaps need to get another prototype and introduce to the community. For the current FIDO UAF 1.1, we already have the code as the open source code, and we will publish the source code to our GitHub. And we will try to promote to the interested party, both public and the private sectors, who want to implement software with the secure authentication mechanism. And because this is quite new to the Thai programmer, so we try to organize the domestic community among the Thai developers, Thai programmers, to exchange the idea and the experience about the authentication solutions and authentication implementations in order to get the insight about the current situation and current the market solution. And once we have the community, we believe that it will help to improve the quality of the authentication mechanism in Thai digital service. And it will help to make the better and secure digital ecosystem in Thailand. Thank you very much.